Yes, just.
At a time where everything has gone virtual, Lake International Pan-African Film Festival 6th edition takes you there. From 3rd to the 6th of November, we take you there to experience humanity through workshops, panel discussions, open forums, screenings and a gala award. Come and experience this year's festival online. Lake International Pan-African Film Festival 6th edition. Disrupt the narrative.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining this particular discussion. Today, the discussion is about documenting African history. I just want to send a special appreciation to everyone joining in live, to our sponsors. We have Kenya Films Commission, Amnesty International Kenya, Talanta Institute, and French Embassy. Thank you so much for supporting LIPF 2021. Today is our final panel discussion, and I officially hand it over to Mr. Gregg.
Thank you very much, Vigilance, and thank you, the Lake International Pan-African Film Festival, for making it to the 6th edition. It's really not, it's not an easy one to consecutively keep organizing these festivals amidst the problems that we're encountering, including COVID-19. I'm happy to moderate the session today. Our session today is on documenting African histories. I'm joined on this panel by very able panelists from different spheres. I can see academia is represented here. I can see practitioners in their own right are represented in here. I can also see we have representatives from government. And so I'll just begin with a quick introduction of who is in the house, and then I'll also invite them to make a quick introduction about themselves. In the house, we have Bettina. We also have Professor Mugubi. We have Gitonga Mwangi. We have Francis Irungu, and we also have Saitabao. And I will just basically ask them to make a quick introduction about themselves and mention what is it that they're working on that is connected to the topic of discussion today. I'll begin with the person on my left hand, that is Francis Irungu. Please, you have 2 minutes to share with us your profile, but also to let us know what is it that you're working on that is connected to the topic of discussion today. Karibu, Francis.
Thank you, Bwana Moderator. I'm Francis Irungu, as you've heard. Francis Irungu works in the Department of Film Services. It is under the Ministry of ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs. Now, we produce documentaries on topical issues. We also preserve and conserve the same. This is, I forgot to say, this is a government department charged with all this responsibility I'm talking about. Now, I've also been asked to say what I'm working on or I've completed. Now, I have the privilege of reporting to you people that I did a film that won an international award, actually last November. This is Mother Nature manifestation in the Great Rift Valley. It's just all about what nature has brought forth. And I just captured that one and I came up with a documentary. And it did won an award. I've also just finished another one. As you are aware, in this country, we had the rising lakes, or rather, what is it? I mean, our lakes have been misbehaving for quite some time. And then I did that documentary. It's just, I called it A Voice of Nature, featuring swelling lakes. It is also doing rounds. It's just a few months old, maybe 2, 3. And that is where we are now. I don't know whether I still can continue to say what we also do as a department. As a government department, we also are charged with the responsibilities of preserving this. We have a huge treasure of this material under the subject we are talking about here. And we have been in existence for quite some time. right from the dawn of independence, we existed in different names. I don't know whether Bwana Moderator, I needed to enumerate all that, or I talk at a later time.
We will come back to that at a later moment. But thank you very much, Francis, for the quick introduction and for joining us today. I want to move on to my right-hand side, and Professor Bettina Mweno, you are over there, and I understand it's quite early where you are.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is. It's early in the morning. I'm in California. I'm a professor at the University of California in Davis. I'm in the African American and African Studies department. I'm trained as an anthropologist, and I am doing work on looking at the history of Nairobi, actually, or the contemporary and history of Nairobi, or thinking about how one documents urban cities in Africa in general, both in text and in film.
Wow, wonderful. I think we're going to have great conversations, because I was also looking at the intersection of written and also visualized artworks in contributing to this topic of discussion today. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us and making time early in the morning to be part of this conversation. It's such an honor to have you. And Mwalimu Mugubi, Professor, I hear you're somewhere away out of this city of ours. You know, how did you go out without telling us? But anyway, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from.
Thank you, Gregg. I'm in Masterata, Italy, on a research project that is being funded by the European Commission. So I'm here with colleagues. So we are researching on European art history. We are involved in an exchange project, which will take the next 4 years. So occasionally we have to travel between Italy and Poland. I am John Mugubi. Maybe that's where I should have begun. I am Dean, School of Creative and Performing Arts, Film and Media Studies at Kenyatta University. I teach film, I teach theater, I teach literature. So in terms of the subject at hand, the works of art that I deal with, film, drama, are essentially a historical necessity, because they intertwine themselves with the destiny of humanity in making, societies be what they are. So essentially, what you're saying is that inevitably, if you're involved in works of art like film or literature or drama, inevitably you have to address history, because as creative processes, or as a creative process, maybe if I can talk about it in generality, creative works of art are also an end conditioned by historical forces and pressure, and they cannot elect to stand above or to transcend economics, politics, class, race, or whatever what Achebe calls the burning issues of the day, because those very burning issues with which they deal take place within an economic, political, class, and race context, and they keep on evolving every day. So inevitably, as a creative artist, I would say every creative artist who is faithful to his or her art is a chronicler of history, inevitably. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it's such a pleasure to have you on board and to also dedicate time amidst your busy schedule to be part of this particular discussion. Saitabao, Kaiyare, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saitabao Kaiyare. I am a filmmaker. I am one half of an organization called Baruu Collective, where we reimagine and rethink the African narrative using film and new media such as augmented reality and virtual reality. So my last project was a documentary that I co-directed and co-produced. It was titled If Objects Could Speak. So the premise of the film is we walk into a European institution and take an object that belongs to Kenya and 3D scan it and bring it back to find out what this object was. because the European museums did not have enough data about this object. So we took this object and took on a journey where we went through using Kenya object is, and our documentary addresses, identity and the issue of restitution and repatriation when it comes to objects. So in regards to this panel, I'm glad to be here, especially to talk about the topic at hand, which is documenting African history. And I'm looking forward to sharing with the panelists and engaging everyone in this discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to actually going deep into this interesting project that you have done and to hear what people say this object was, just so that we can place it in time and history. Gitonga Mwangi, how are you and where are you joining us from? Please unmute.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good and I'm glad to be here. Yeah, great. Sorry, I'm actually in Nakuru. We are shooting a small, not a small project, it's a TV series, so I had to travel here urgently. But my name is, of course, Gitonga Mwangi. I'm a filmmaker and also I'm a content producer as well as a distributor. So on this particular project I'm doing, it has nothing to do with history, but just a fictional story, drama. But actually, I love to work on most of these African kind of legendary stories. And I've done several, one being Luanda Magere, the Legend of the Rock. And right now we are working with one of my mentor, that is Mr. Mulwa, David Mulwa, on a project called The Oath of the Ancients, which is based on a particular oath from Kamba people called Kiditu. So that is one of the most interesting part of what I'm doing as for now. So I'm also happy to be here, and I hope we'll have to learn and also share a little bit of what we have. Thank you.
Wonderful. It's such a pleasure to hear from you and to hear the work that you're doing and to also bring us the sound of live on location, the birds, Nakuru and all that, just to mix it into this part of our discussion. It just creates a good feeling. So thank you very much. And I look forward to also hearing a lot more about the Kiditu work that you're working on. Now, going down into the subject of the day, I have a question for you, Professor Bettina. And this question around why, please frame it for us, why it's important to document African history. And you mentioned two things that you work two media that you work through, which is written but both films. So in your response to this particular question, I'd like you to explore deeper what is the power of these two medium in documenting and presenting, and especially also considering what are the consumption habits on the continent with regards to history. Over to you.
Thank you so much. That's quite a big question. I will perhaps start with this idea of the different medias. We have multiple ways of telling stories. And I think what is fabulous today is how immediate film is, and digital media of all kinds. I'm saying film, but it could be television, YouTube videos, but motion pictures, let's say, how powerful it is to tell stories, how you can reach a much wider audience than you might do with books. But some of the process of getting the information is similar. And I think especially with history, this becomes super important in trying to figure out what is the historical context that we're thinking of, to think of history and the social sort of situation into which any story enters, and then how it might have resonance with the present. So I'll give you the example of the work that I'm doing. I have two projects, one which is writing a book on Nairobi, which is called Growing Old in a New City. I was struck that Nairobi is changing so tremendously fast, and we just think of all the new things. And then I thought, well, how does that feel to be aging in that in that context. And in particular, I was thinking of my parents and my dad, who had lived all his life within about 2 kilometers of where he was born. And being from Nairobi, then what did that sort of mean as the city changes around you, as it doubles in size and triples in size and 5 times in size? What is the city? How is it different? And but I didn't start it off as a book. So that's the book I'm working on, is looking at different moments in Nairobi and how people thought about Nairobi, not the planners, but the people who lived there, how they thought about Nairobi and what kind of a city they were building in their own actions and emotions. So, but I started that actually as a project interested in making a film. And I was interested in making a film that came out of some music that comes out of the 1950s. All of that we think of as Zilizopendwa, but it comes out of the 1950s, time when there was a Nairobi sound. And I was just struck, I was in the South Coast, and people were singing some of these songs about Nairobi, as, you know, you might sing folk songs to their kids at night or whatever, but they all were referencing Nairobi. And I was thinking, why Nairobi? Why did it become, why is this song there? And my dad was telling me, oh, those were songs that were super important in Nairobi while he was growing up. And I was particularly interested in how do you tell that story of how Nairobi became so important to other places through a film. And I decided to do a film about people who were situated, like my family, in working in the railways and in the spaces of railway housing before independence, and to figure out what they were trying to do and how they were trying to live in the city. To give a longer history of Nairobi, we always think of Nairobi as terribly new. You know, Nairobi started when we got there kind of idea. But as a city of mainly people who have migrated as adults, you know, we forget about long-term residents. So I went and did about 2 years research, interviewing people in multiple different places, because most people of that age had moved, many had moved back to the countryside. So whether it was in Ukambani or Western Kenya or Nyanza, different places where you had really a huge number of people of backgrounds in Nairobi, went and interviewed people about their life in Nairobi. And then I thought, gosh, this would also actually make a really interesting book. So I started with the film and all the work that needed to do to really know the context before you set a historical piece. And then I went to the book. And so I guess what I would say about the connection between those two issues is that research is super important, and research that uses sound, it uses written text, it uses literature, it uses biographies, it uses autobiographies, it uses blogs, networks. You know, we had to interview all kinds of different, look for all kinds of different sources to get an idea about life in a certain moment in Nairobi. And I don't know if you want me to go on at all, or I can leave it.
No, let's hold it at that point, because you mentioned some interesting things about, you know, research is important, sound, text, literature, autobiographies, and stuff like that. And I wanted to still go back into speaking with Francis from the Department of Film Services, and also understanding what importance does the government place on the idea of documenting African history, and in this context, documenting Kenyan history, for example, and you know, what progress has been made so far through the Department of Film Services, for example, in documenting these histories and bringing them onto the people.
Okay, thank you once again. Mm-hmm. Now, as I said, I just want to start from where I left, that the department has been around for quite some time. At the dawn of independence, the department existed as DFU, that's Documentary Film Unit, which changed the name towards the late 70s into FPD, that is a Film Production Department. And then to the current name, the Department of Film Services, in the early 2000s. Now, with all that, I just decided to bring this so that I can reveal to our viewers the history behind this department and what we've been able to achieve over the time. Now, the department boasts, or rather it has a huge treasure of estimated 6 million footage of both celluloid, for both 16 and 35 millimeter celluloid technology. You will recall, my dear panelists, that before the digital era that we enjoy today, we still had another technology that existed. This is celluloid technology. It has been in existence for over 130 years. Now, we have been able to amass all that wealth of the footage, and it is in our custody. This so that I can create the impact, and so that the viewers can even understand and appreciate the kind of treasure we are talking about here. This footage, if it can be threaded between the Mombasa-Nairobi route, it can go there 4 times. That is, once you convert 6 million, and this is estimated, 6 million feet of this technology, of this celluloid material I'm talking about here. This in addition to other material, we've also kept them in Betacams, DVCams, HDD, which are these are the only other avenues that we store our data. This is the database that we do have currently, but we also look forward to maybe open up as technology goes by, so that we can also store more material in other maybe broad-based technology. But as of now, we have this treasure, and it is important to note at this juncture here that the renowned, and I believe the Madam Professor Bettina, I think this is the relative who did us proud and did some series, TV series, in conjunction with the Nation Media Group. They came up with the 14 series. That's the making of the nation. We had the pressure. Actually, I was also involved in accessing this material to the good icon. And he did it. And later on, I also benefited out of it. I did the thesis out of it. And perhaps this one I'll talk about it maybe if I get time a little bit earlier. So we have been able, and in our small way, we've been able to amass all this treasure, and we will continue to treasure more. I mean, as a department. I think that answers your question, Bwana Moderator.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I was also interested in having a deeper context on the contribution of DFS in documenting African history and also presenting it to Kenyans for consumption. Do you have some particular insights that you could give us in that regard?
Yes, I have actually, as I've just indicated, is that we had the 14. I don't know whether you've come across this, the 14 series that Hilary Mweno did. Actually, under the name, as I said, The Making of the Nation. Yeah, these have been shared through our mainstream media, all the TV, the televisions, particularly the Nation TV. Yeah. Okay. So out of that, and it is actually in the older technology, so it has to, some conversions have to be done for them now to apply today in today's technology. So these are some of the contributions we have. It is under key headlock in our department there, and we both, nobody has that. Yeah, that's celluloid, and I've stated the length of that material. I don't know. I don't think I need to repeat it.
No. You don't need. Okay, great. Thanks. I got that now. I got it. That one of the key contributions has been the very famous Hilary Mweno's series on making of the nation. That
yes,
and so that is very clear. Great, yes. Dr. Mugubi, I'm coming to you, and now I want us to think through you know, what is the role of academia, particularly, especially in you know, in documenting African histories, and what is it that you're actually currently doing within you know, Kenyatta University and your faculty to actually make this an important subject for your learners within your programs?
Thank you. In terms of what we are doing, of course, when it comes to teaching, we emphasize on our students, you know, drawing from what is happening in society. You know, history is quite broad, because when you talk about history, you're just simply talking about a record of past events, especially in connection with the human race, or a drama representing historical events. So the idea is to emphasize on documentation on issues that reflect who we are. You have heard of controversies about certain films that have been made in this country, and there will be an uproar because there are those who feel that the kind of art that some Kenyans, you know, produce does not really touch the pulse of Kenyans. So as a professor, I emphasize on drawing from this particular conference of by Africans in 1971 that happened in West Africa, where after independence, because most African countries gained their independence in the 60s, a number of artists came together from the African continent, and they thought it was very important to set some kind of focus for African art. I'm talking about Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. They're all in that particular conference, and they came up with what they would call the role of an African artist, and I think these roles still apply right now. So when we are talking of documentation, we should also be looking at the roles that the works we produce would serve or would you play in society. The first one being, of course, social criticism, mediation between conflicting issues, moral guidance, which is very, very important for us as Africans, art as a form of social philosophy, so that we are able to use art within that record of history to be able to philosophize by focusing on what is happening now. What can we learn about what is happening now in terms of what the future will be like, so that we know what we are doing right and what we are not doing right, so that we can project what the future would be like. And art indeed is a very great you know, source of social philosophy. Very, very important, of course, is to conserve our own or preserve our own culture, because as we modernize, and it's projected that in the next you know, maybe 30, 50 years, more than 75% of Africans will be living in urban centers. And in urbans, you're talking about a fusion of cultures where sometimes we lose what really belong to us. So how can we ensure that we use the arts to preserve our cultures before it's adulterated, although that's not the word I would use, because there's a lot of hybridity in the urban centers, but we still need to retain what was ours, and art can play a crucial role in that regard. So as a professor, I really emphasize to our students in terms of art with social relevance within that domain of you know, history, documenting what is our own, so that we don't lose it, because, you know, like I said, we are really transforming very fast. Professor Bettina actually mentioned something about Nairobi changing very fast, and it's very, very important that we record our own history, and art can play a critical role in that regard. Thank you.
Yeah, and Professor, do you think that we lay a lot of focus, you know, for example, in when we talk about documenting African history, is like we lay a lot of emphasis in looking at things retrospectively, things that happened in the past, as opposed to, you know, to actually doing commentary that is very contemporary, like what Professor Bettina has talked about.
Yeah, you are right. Many times we look at you know, history retrospectively, like you said, yet there's so much that is even happening now that we need to focus on in terms of changing our intellectual and imaginative activity to focus on the images and the tensions and the conflicts and the contradictions that are at the heart of our community, presently, and in our process of becoming whatever we'll become in the future, because art is very critical in terms of reflecting not just the past, but also the aesthetic and the imaginative planes, or of even the present society, as we wrestle with our own environment to produce the basic means of life, food, clothing, shelter, and in the process of creating and recreating ourselves. We should not just focus on the past, because there's a lot that is happening now. But I wouldn't be very harsh on artists, because most of the arts we watch, whether it's dramas like the TV dramas that are popular currently in Kenya, you would still see some form of criticism on what is happening in Kenya or in Africa right now. So I will not categorically say that mostly we emphasize on the past. We still have artists who do a good job in terms of moving with the times. And like I said, sometimes it's inevitable, because our work of art cannot ignore the demands and the needs of the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much as well for framing that for us. And now I want to go to Saitabao, and you actually spoke about using very contemporary media forms, 3D animation, augmented reality, and all that kind of stuff. What is the underlying inspiration for you to start to work with these particular art forms, and how do you create context for the work that you're working on, in terms of you're looking at some element in the past, but you're also looking at how that fit in the present, and how do these media actually enable you to reach other audiences that would otherwise not be reached by this form of text?
So at the end of the day, the world is always fast changing, and a lot of things happen and move forward. So for us, I would say how we also got into this form of new media, especially using augmented reality and virtual reality, was out of a need and a necessity, because we wanted to sort of document these objects and find out their history, and find out the history and what it meant to the people, and what are the ideas and philosophies that these objects held. So because we were not able to take the physical objects back home, so that's when we decided to sort of recreate and use our imagination and use new technology in form of preserving this knowledge system. Apart from that, sometimes we know history can be a bit boring, right? And for us is how can we make it fun and interactive, so that people, even especially the young people, can also have the experience and be immersed in the experience. So for example, using augmented reality, you're able to sort of see like the object in itself. So for us, it's very important sort of to merge history and new media together, and it's a form of new documentation, because at the end of the day, if you look at all forms of documentation before, they are sort of becoming redundant, because people are not going to the archives, if you're a historian. But also, how do you engage the masses? Because at the end of the day, history is not supposed to be kept in a vault, in a dusty vault where you need someone to, open for you. History is supposed to be ever changing. It has to be documented in an ever changing world, and it also has to be very engaging to the audiences. So using new media and also using very artistic kind of filmmaking, this is how you engage the masses.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And I think I'm also particularly interested in are there any particular tactics that you're also applying in this context to speak to younger, to the younger, or get this content arrive at the doorstep of younger, youthful audiences that might otherwise not be necessarily going out to research this history, but really should be actually experiencing this history?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is how you shape the narrative and how you shape the story. So when it comes to filmmaking, the question has always been how can I attract some? How can I get there? How can I grasp their attention? We all know that in this world and this there's a lot of content being consumed, and people have a very short attention span. So that's why you have the Insta stories, the TikToks. People just want to move on. So it's also about how you can structure the history and the story so that the first image as a filmmaker you already capture and grasp your audience.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And now, Gitonga, and I know that you have some challenges connected from there. Thank you so much for still keeping with us. But I want to come to you based on the works that you've been doing. You've mentioned two important things that you've worked on: the Luanda Magere story as well as the Kibitu story of the Akamba. Well, in themselves, these are these are subjects that have occurred, as we mentioned, retrospectively. So it's going back in time and trying to bring back this. What are some of the tools, tactics, techniques that you're really applying in terms of making these stories accessible? Not just for the young people, but just actually for the nation that is sometimes accused of having being very forgetful of its past, or not very interested in understanding its roots.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. I mean, I don't know if you're getting me right, or am I audible? Do you hear me? Yes.
Please go ahead. We can hear you. Yes.
Yes. Now, I've been working on two projects. Okay, in the year 2018, I worked on a short film called Luanda Magere, and this is based on what I had read when I was still very young. I think I was in class 4 or something like that. So I was interested in those kind of stories. And those years, we used to read a lot of. So when I got the opportunity to show it on screen, I decided to make Luanda Magere in just 3 minutes. And as Saitabao said, these days people have
Hello, Gitonga. We seem to be having a connection problem from your end. Hello, Gitonga, are you there? Please. Okay, I think we're experiencing some connection challenges with Gitonga, so I think I'll move on a bit and come back to him later. When working with these virtual technologies, sometimes some of these things happen, and we just have to make do with them. So thanks so much, panelists, for giving us like an insight into what you've been working on, and also how those things connect with the current context of our work. I wanted us to go into a slightly different direction right now, and what I want us to think about is within the context of within the context of the Kenyan nation. What do we feel within the context of the Kenyan nation, in particular, for example? What do we feel has been our contribution towards bringing some of these stories? And I want to look specifically on some of the techniques that we are utilizing to create accessibility for the wider Kenyan audience. And let me begin by Francis on the question of the Hillary, on the series on the Hillary Mwendwa, Making of a Nation. And I know that it aired within the context of NTV. I think I watched that series from the very beginning to the very end. But I would love to understand, are there any deliberate plans in making this accessible to other, to across the nation, maybe people that don't have access to TV. I do remember there was a time that Department of Film Services was going across the country and screening. Does that happen anymore? Moving forward, so let's speak accessibility for many of these works that we're doing. Welcome back, Gitonga. I'll be back with you. So let's go, Francis.
Okay, thank you once again. Now the accessibility of our material. Now, as a government department, we are just open to anybody coming, who wants to seek our material. We don't discriminate. We just have all at the same time equally. And anybody, even the researchers, we make it possible for them to access our material. Now, this material we are talking about here, before it has been preserved for quite sometimes. It involves a lot of it involves the Kapenguria 6. As you recall, these are the freedom fighters, heroes. Yeah, and today, in fact, it is so important because there is nowhere else you can access that material. And no wonder why. Ngeno could not have gone any other place other than our place there, because we are in the custody of, we keep those materials, and there is nowhere it can be accessible. Having said that, I also need to add that it is also in the technology I said earlier, the celluloid technology. This is the technology that preceded the current digital we have. And when a moderator, I still have problems with this digital era, like our friend are saying, history shapes our future. And preserving this material for generations to come, for posterity, it's so critical. You can imagine, having said that the history shapes the future, without this history, there is little we can run. Our future generation, the generation that is going to come after us, maybe 100 years, 100 years from today or 200, they needed to find something concerning their nation. Now, this material, why Professor Mugubi, as also we've had a venture with him. He was also a supervisor in a way, and he still used to make fun of me. I'm so much attached to that technology because it has a lot to offer, that technology. You see, according to the International Federation of Film Archives, it places the lifespan of this technology, the celluloid technology, at 500. That is, once several conditions are met, and they are so simple to meet. That is 5 degrees Celsius, 35% humidity. That's so critical. Very easy to achieve that. And even then, even after that 100 years that the lifespan of this material has been put on, it's not a time bomb that it will explode after that time. If the same, I believe, if the same parameters are still observed, it can even surpass that and even more. You can imagine how many generations, 500 years alone, how many generations it can serve in this country. And so, I don't want to scare the people who are so much like our good friend, I think he said, our good was saying that the current day, I don't need to scare people, but this digital technology has not been tested long enough to entrust it with our history, which is the subject matter here. We need a backup. We need a backup so that if anything go astray, at least we have somewhere we can just fall back. And therefore, we need also to think, as a government, we are also formulating that and thinking that it's only that our policymakers sometimes are slow in acting. But that's a subject of another day. Now, I have talked so much, so I don't know, perhaps you can just bring me to the path again.
Well, yes, I think you've mentioned something about accessibility and storage, and that's good for now. I want to just go back into the context of the work of Hilary Mwendwa, and I think, yes, Professor Bettina, you have you might have something you would like to add around, that piece of work.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Francis, for preserving those works, and especially the works that were made with the nation. Overall, my father made actually a huge amount of documentaries, including over 160 biographies with different people who he saw as important to Kenya's history. And also, he made documentaries of institutions, for instance, a history of banking, that he thought was important. Also, some of those works were made with the nation and some weren't. And most of them exist right now, were given as his whole office and library was given to Moi University. They set up the Hilary Mwendwa Center for Media Research in East Africa. And so, but I think Francis's comments about the preservation of materials is really difficult. The other things that were sent there were all complete copies of the Weekly Review and of Rainbow Magazine. And so I think they're a wonderful possibility of a resource, but do need the funding, the issues for this question about preservation, which is incredibly important. When I was doing my research, I was using the archives of the railways, and I remember seeing some of those 16mm films just, at that time in the archives lying on the ground and in piles of dust and water and stuff. So it's terribly sad, but also they're very hard to preserve in general. The railways has an immense collection of photographs that really tell history in a really interesting way. They were promotional for the railways, but actually they are an incredible documentation of Nairobi and of the country's history because of the railway moving throughout. And I think I'm so interested in what Saitabao was talking about, this 3D animation of things that you can't access, because we worked with someone on the railway issues who's doing 3D visualizations of railway stations. Now they've been taken down to build the new railway. So I think these are just such exciting moments for documenting these, giving us other options to get at some of these documents. But the preservation question is really, wow, it's a tough one.
Wow, wonderful. Thanks for shedding a lot of light on this one. And I do agree with you that the preservation is also directly connected to accessibility. Like how material is preserved also enables multiple access points, for example, for different people in multiple locations. And that is definitely also critical in enabling this material be accessed remotely and by different people at different times, and it's a critical question of discussion. And let's hear Saitabao. You have, you have some comments also around, accessibility, and what do you have to share with us?
Yeah, I just wanted to. I'd like first of all to thank Mr. Francis and the Department of Film Services for the wonderful work you've done in terms of preservation. It's very important because I also feel you should not see as new technology sort of competing with, let's say, the preservation that has been done, sort of a way sort of to complement. Think of it as a backup plan, right? And I know especially digitizing things can be very sensitive because there are a lot of issues, especially in that space, be it intellectual property. However, I feel not to sort of blow back when it comes to new technology. Also, I feel also when we look at history, because it's very sensitive, and it's from what point of view? Because we're at this very period of time where you can look at it subjective and objectively. So how can you be able to decipher? Because it's a very sensitive topic. Who was documenting this history? Because at the end of the day, there can be flaws, and where there are flaws, they can be corrected. And so that's why I always say history always take it with a pinch of salt. I'm not saying entirely scrap it off, but it's very important because there are a lot of areas that are not explored. In regards to accessibility, mine would be to sort of request, especially the Department of Film Service, in terms of accessibility, because you find people, yes, can come. The doors are always open. I have been there quite a number of times, and the doors are always open. However, the challenge is always when you want to sort of work with such material, it becomes too pricey for a local filmmaker. So in terms, I would kindly urge the sort of government, because if you want to make this history accessible, you also have to give artists accessibility to use this material to complement their creative work. So that would be just my appeal to the government body.
Yes. Thank you. I want to give Francis a moment to respond to these two issues that I've also just touched on, the Department of Film Services, but also his thinking around technology. And then I'm going to come back to you, Gitonga. I think now you're at a stable point of communication. So Francis, what do you have to say about these 2 points?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Bwana Moderator, for having me once again. Now, I want to make a minute to let my fellow panelists to know that us being a government entity, and as I said, we avail this material equally. I mean, for everybody. However, there are some also, like any organization has also some parameters one needs to follow. Like for researchers, we offer these materials for free because they are not just about to go there and make money out of that. But anybody else who wants to make maybe private documentary or something like that, there are some fee one has to charge, but very minimal, yeah, just to make that difference so that the material is also not abused. You know, in this, I mean, in this society we live today, people do a lot of things with they can do a lot with such materials. Maybe perhaps you can come there and, at a later date, and then we talk through, and then you can understand and appreciate the same. Yeah. However, this, as I said, this technology, actually, it was not even meant for poor people. It was damnly expensive for even private independent filmmaker, damnly expensive. Because you require a lot of resources for you maybe to come with maybe perhaps even 10 minutes length of film. Quite a colossal amount of money. You can't even imagine. However, and I appreciate the fact that we are in digital era, and we can't run away from that. And we really cannot even go back there. I appreciate having said that, we need now to have the two technologies complement each other, because they complement each other, and then because everything there is some strength in this and it's some and the weaknesses in the other, so that the weakness in the other they can just come and find a middle ground there, and that's why we cannot run away from technology. We are there, and we have to swim there. Yeah, the digital technology is good. It's so simplistic. It allows people like my fellow panelists there to make films. It was a dream. You couldn't even have dreamt some years back before this digital technology. You couldn't even dare go that direction. Now that it is there, the only thing we need now is awareness. Now, say for instance, now we have not even found a very good formula that we can even, store this material for posterity with this digital tech. You can even imagine if you are to, for example, if you are to store your material with a DVD, for instance, yeah, a DVD can get scratched, and where does that leave you? There are other things I don't want you to talk about all of them, but they still have some weaknesses. And like I said in my opening speech or contribution, is that the digital technology has not been tested long enough to be entrusted with the history of this this country and even in the world at large. It has not been tested long enough to say this. We can just now place our history in this format. We still have to have some backup, even as we embrace the digital technology. And this is the way we feel we are formulating it. This is the way we feel we should do. It's just backup. Yeah, but you see, you cannot even run away from somewhere. I mean, the formula that you have tested for over 100 years, because this technology, the cellular technology, was discovered in 1889 by one Thomas Edison at that time, and it has served the world all these years. In fact, there are some other producers, even as we speak today, they have just literally refused to adapt the new technology. They still fall back, but these are in Europe. They still fall back into that technology that they know. They talk of resolution. They think there is nothing that has come anywhere near in terms of resolution. So, but as I've said, and my good fellow panelists, we have to embrace technology. We can't even dare to run away from it. But I think the way to go is to have the two complement each other. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you that it is important for the two to complement each other. So then, as we have backward compatibility, we can also be able to access new audiences and also avail this content remotely to other people. I want to move now to Gitonga because he's in a stable place, and I want us to go back to the two projects that you've been working on. We missed hearing on the great work about those, their inspiration, their importance, and why you choose to invest in that retrospective nature of looking at stuff. And then I also would like you to comment on the question of monetization, which opens up the next part of our conversation now, because yes, for any work to make sense, monetization is an important thing, how you make money out of it. But I'm definitely sure that there are issues that are connected with monetization, there are issues that are connected with distribution. You yourself, you mentioned that you are in distribution, so it would be good for you to also give us a bit of context that is associated with distribution and monetization in that regard. So welcome back, Gitonga, nice to have you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm on the road, and you know, sometimes these things don't just. But first, I want to talk about the two projects I did in terms of, you know, documenting history. My fellow panelists have talked about, you know, a documentary kind of form of filmmaking. But one of the things we have to know is very few people, or a big majority of viewers or target audience, want to watch a film in terms of, you know, fiction or stuff like that. And one of the ways to make, let's say, one of the ways I think it's very important to document our African history is by making films, not only documentary films. Let's make films. And that's why we can come with stories like, you know, Luanda Magere or Kiritu, the ones I'm talking about, the ones I'm working on. Kiritu is actually a very kind of, in quotes, special oath that was practiced by the Akamba people. So in a way, we are making films, but also documenting our history. Apart from that, we have so many other, you know, legendary kind of stories. We have stories from different parts of Africa that talk about history, about these legends. It may be myth or maybe something that came up, you know, according to particular tradition. So I think as African filmmakers, we not only have to document or make documentary films to document our history, but we can take a form of filmmaking, which is basically fiction, and rethink our history or document our history in this particular way, like a film. I'll give an example. When Wakanda came, I can't remember the film, it was called Wakanda or something like that. It was actually based on something to do with African history. So one of the ways we can do is, as filmmakers, we can actually document some of happenings of African history in a film form. That is one of the ways. And as a distributor or somebody who is buying content and also selling, I think it's high time for African people to make films that also have these elements of history in them, in terms of costume, in terms of location, in terms of historical sites and stuff like that. So let's not only rush to making films about our cities and everything like that, and forgetting to document our history by using our talents and our work to export our history and our cultures and our stories to the outside world. This way, we don't have to copy, we don't have to imitate, films from outside the world, outside the world. So as African filmmakers, I'll advise very much that why don't we research well, and let's say we go to like Department of Film Services, we adapt our history, some of the stories that are actually books, we adapt some of the books based on the history of our cultures or our stories, and make films out of that and export that. It's a very good way of making money. I'll talk also about Netflix. Recently, there was a call from Netflix for short films that are we rethink our stories, we recreate, not rethink, we recreate our stories and apply for funds. So it's one way, if Netflix is interested in us Africans to recreate our stories and show what we have to the entire world, then it means we can export our stories and also document our history. So it's one of the ways we can make money when we do what we know better than trying to imitate stories from outside the world. It is not to say that we cannot make a story about based on what is affecting us right now as Africans. It is also a good thing because we have all these TV series and everything. But one of the work I'm doing is actually the Oath of the Ancients. It is based on a Kiditu, and it's going to be a TV series. So we are still doing a lot of research, and I'm happy to have Mr. Francis Irungu there, because if we can be able to access some of these materials, because some of what we have is, the challenge we most have is accessing information, or accessing some of these things like costume or how people dress long time ago and stuff like that. So as filmmakers, especially African filmmakers, I know we have challenge in those kind of areas, and it's good to have departments like Department of Film Services, and also to have financiers or people who support film like Kenya Film Commission. So it's something that is good. And also I'm glad to hear from Saitabao that he's actually collecting some of these props. I'll call them props for now because I'm a filmmaker, but it's important that I can now contact Saibato and say, okay, I need to know how Kikuyu is used to till their land and stuff like that, so that I can be able to recreate some of this information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gitonga, for that contribution. And I do think that there's quite a lot that could be spoken around, fictional films and history. And maybe Dr. Mugubi, you have something to share with us in this regard.
Thank you, Greg. I just wanted to add to what Gitonga said, because many times when you talk of recording history, we think documentary, and we think of just recording, especially maybe the experiences of our heroes, which is very critical, and documentary has its place in society. We cannot ignore that. But my line of thinking as a creative artist mostly is towards, using creativity, of course, agreeing with Saitabao, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, because you also have to think about the target audience. Like I said, documentary has its place, but there's an audience that will be more engaged if you fused aspects of history with creativity, and that's where feature films have a role to play. And we also need to acknowledge that filmmakers have been doing that over time, because we have quite a number of what they need to do is to do much more in terms of recording. For instance, films such as the first grade kitchen total, they talk about our own experience to be able to understand issues of racism and how to deal with issues of ethnicity. There are quite a number of films that have been made, fictional films that have been made on this historical moment that we would want to forget, that is a post-election violence, which you find in some of the films that I'm mentioning. Marooned. There are aspects of history there in that we're talking about how we relate as people of ethnic communities, and it's done beautifully just using two different characters. Something Necessary by Judy Kibinge. There's a lot of our history, especially what precipitated the post-election violence, and within that, of course, is like Kibinge is telling us never again through the plot structure. So I would really emphasize that it's also possible to record our history beautifully by employing the fictional films very well, and that can be done. Gitonga has done that very well. I would want to say something about accessibility. There is a problem in terms of accessibility. There are few who are now uploading their films on on YouTube, but it's sad that many films, for instance, I have supervised my students at master's and PhD level who analyze a number of Kenyan films, and unfortunately, they had to go and camp at the Kenya Film Commission Library to be able to do their study, because these films are not accessible. So we may want to deal with that particular problem, because I wouldn't say there's a problem in terms of how we record. The major problem, I think, is accessibility. There are so many films generated every other day, but how many Kenyans get to know about these particular films? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Dr. Mugubi, for that. I want us to also wrap up on this conversation around monetization. And so this is to you, Saitabao, because at the end of the day, the only way to sustain your art form is being able to monetize it and being able to benefit from it. And you are working in the new media space, and I mean, and from looking from the outside here, people think, oh, it's so easy to monetize, within particular place. Could you share with us what are some of the challenges and opportunities that are, connected with monetization, especially for this work that is connected to documenting African histories?
So of course, even in film in itself, it's always been hard in terms of monetization, because there's always a struggle with people acquiring the content. It's always a whole challenge, and so it's always figuring out how to navigate that space in itself. So one of the things, for example, especially in new media, still in the process of sort of like, it's a very new space. So looking for forms of monetization. So for us, basically at this very particular moment, we are not really interested in sort of monetizing from that aspect. It's more of, you'd say maybe CSR in that way, so that this history is preserved in this form. And then also because we also work with different partners, mostly NGOs, who are very interested in the preservation of this of cultural heritage in itself. So we're always still trying to reinvent, and I think even Gitonga can help, because he's a distributor on some of the channels he's been able to explore or foresee that can be explored. Because I know even in film, even I as a filmmaker always find distribution the most painful process in the very end. Filming and post-production, everything, of course, is also blood, sweat, and tears. But when it comes to distribution, it's always a headache, because also it's just always having conversations with the people acquiring the content. So I don't know, Gitonga has disappeared, but yeah, so that's what I'd like to say.
Hello, Saitabao. I think I missed the last part of your conversation.
Oh yeah, so I was saying we're still trying to discover and how to sort of monetize this. So this can be sort of also selling this forms of art pieces, for example, in digital.
Okay. I think we're having a small challenge with connecting with Saitabao. So I think.
So yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me
now
now?
you're.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you're.
Sorry for that. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was saying, especially when it comes to new media like virtual reality, augmented reality. So there are new ways where we are trying to explore, such as it's called NFT. How can you sell art pieces in this digital form? It's a very new space, and and as we are at the moment, we want to be there at the moment, not to be surpassed by time, where we're always trying to play catch up. As even for us, it gives us an opportunity to sort of explore the territory even further and deepen our roots in terms of distribution and monetizing.
Thank you. And I think the conversation around monetization will be here for some time. Gitonga wanted to add something on that, but he's been bumped offline. But technology in its complexity. When all this is going on, there's always a very central question of intellectual property. And I want Professor Bettina to frame it for us. What are the challenges that are associated with documenting African histories? And these are challenges that are directly connected to intellectual property. Who owns the intellectual property? And do the communities that even provide these stories? And I want to take you back to a lot of the African history has not even been documented by ourselves. It's been documented for us, and there will always be questions around, do the communities that have provided this content fairly benefit from telling their own stories? Over to you, Professor Bettina.
Thank you for that. I think that's a really important question on the question of documenting history, and it touches on a number of things that were said before. I think there are really three questions with intellectual property. One of them is access, one of them is money, and the last one is how the story is told. And I think these are very different things. We often just look at the money side of it. But I think if we look at the other two, they're actually more important. The intellectual property regime basically uphold an idea that those who record it own it. And I'll give you the quick example. We were talking about my father's documentaries. They're partly owned by the nation. Part of the reason no one can see them is that the nation doesn't show them. But since they own it, they own it. There's not much else we can do about that. There's some that weren't. So we put up a YouTube, which hits on the issue of accessibility, right? So we put up a YouTube channel that shows some of the ones that weren't also owned by the nation. But as soon as you have this problem of, okay, but there's no monetization of that. So again, you have the three things work together. Quite often we think about the use of either stories, local stories, that are particular to certain communities, or even objects, because now Saitabao made me think about this, objects that are particular to certain communities. I think we need to really carefully think about how we monetize those and what's our relationship to those communities. This is not a question of law, it's really a question of practice. What's the relationship to the communities when we monetize things? Will they have access to their own material? We're all talking about how difficult it is to access the material that Francis holds, for instance. monetarization and intellectual property actually becomes a tremendous, tremendous problem. On one side, we have to make money on the works that we do. On the other side, what is fair compensation to people? If we use a story, let's say Luanda Magere even, that is specific to a community, what is their role in the telling of that story? So I think what's interesting in that is not so much whether we can tell it or not, because I do think we can tell it and we can tell multiple versions of that story, but it's also who gets to tell it and how many times. If you only have one version told by someone from outside, that's all that rules. But if we tell 10, 50, 100 versions of Luanda Magere, then we get a really rich, deep, nuanced idea of all the possibilities that that story enables. But it has to be local, and it has to be, I think the emphasis should be in the funding of local material and local ability to tell those stories, but also platforms that can reach communities from which those stories arise. I was so interested that Gitonga's version is 3 minutes, you know, so you can see it on a cell phone, you can see it, I mean, I presume you can see it. Again, I don't know the accessibility, but it provides a different kind of, to think through some of those ways of getting at around this question of IP. So in general, intellectual property has the problem of, as a legal system, it's skewed towards those who own the technology. And when we generally talk about it in terms of things like stories or what we call traditional knowledges, we talk about nations owning it. And we don't actually go down to the level of communities. So the intellectual property regimes that we have in Kenya really look at, you know, the Ministry of to put under the framework of heritage, so it becomes a national thing. But that doesn't necessarily help with access, and it doesn't necessarily help in who is telling the story. So I think some of the amazing, if I think of an African storyteller, Naguib Mahfouz, who wrote the story Children of Gebelawi, which was a retelling of different stories of the Bible, or the Quran, however you want to say it, since those parts overlap. The question about, did he have a right to retell it? Everybody has a right to retell it. His was a particular one from Egypt, looking at this story in a very particular way. And so the access to material, I think really the question is, what kinds of stories are being told about it?
Thank you very much, Professor Bettina, for framing us this question around intellectual property. And I want to go to Francis because there's this, you know, responsibility that is laid on, you know, access of national archives, you know, national history, the intellectual property that is concerned with that. And I'd just like to understand how are we managing this from the perspective of the Department of Film Services, especially on the intellectual property question?
Oh, thank you once again. And I want to agree totally with what Professor Bettina has just put across. Here, we call it copyright issues. And that's why we are accessible, because we are a government entity. So we are a public funded, and therefore the doors are wide open for the public. Now, it is just touching on what my good Professor Mugubi also said, that it is true that many films are not accessible for analysis. Yeah, and it is attached to the same issue, the copyright issues. Even if, as a department, we wanted perhaps to preserve and conserve maybe Gitonga's films, or Saitabao, I hope I also pronounced that name well, or any other Kenyan for that matter, there are strings attached, yeah, which was my good professor was also alluding to. Here we call it copyright issues. And it is for this, and this is the elephant in the room, it is for this that the film out there, they are not accessible. Yeah. So if one wants to analyze, for instance, maybe a film by Gitonga, you have also to know the formula you used to talk to him so that he can avail his work. However, as a department, we just want, or we are just looking into ways where we can say, maybe look, we can just maybe preserve maybe other people's film, not necessarily the ones we generate, so that we have a common goal here to play, just preserve history, as we are just debating here. And this history, we want to preserve it for posterity. Maybe, as I said earlier, generations to come, be it 100 years or 200. We have to find a formula of even just maybe getting other people's work and then having a common place, even if it doesn't have to be DFS, a central place where it can be preserved for the same posterity. Yeah. So yes, we just are accessible because we are a public entity, and I don't think I should be able on that fact. The other private works just remain that private because of copyright issues. I hope I've answered that question.
Yes, you've shed light on a very important and tough subject that is connected to a lot of the points of conversation today, including accessibility and monetization. So it's not one that we can exhaust today, but I feel like we are able in this conversation to identify disconnects that need further conversations, further research, and further ways of really managing, really managing these issues, because they are, both enablers as well as hindrances to the advancement of African histories and how they're documented and circulated. So thank you for that contribution, Francis, and Professor Bettina as well, and the rest of the panelists. I want to move on to another part of our conversation, which is most of our African histories rely on oral, are passed on, generation to generation through the oral medium, And I want Professor Mugubi to also frame for us, what are some of the challenges that are associated with orality as a medium and the reliance on orality for for many of these conversations. And as I do this, we have about 30 minutes of this conversation. And so members who are watching us from the gallery, please, on the comment sections, feel free to type in questions that I can also fill for the panelists so that you can also participate. So Professor Mugubi, the floor is yours.
Gregg, I think there was instability on my part. Just say, maybe just repeat it very fast. The question on orality.
Yes, absolutely. We rely so much on oral literature or oral way of passing a lot of the information, especially in terms of African history. And I also wanted you to share with us, the challenges and opportunities of, of orality in itself as a form of passing on African history.
Thank you. There is the fact is that when you're talking about history, we still have a lot of information actually with the elderly who may not be able to to write it down. So inevitably we have to get this information orally, even as much as there are certain disadvantages because oral information on history actually depends on an individual recalling what I may call a false memory. And in some cases, when events, for instance, take place more than 30 years ago, the individual could have trouble remembering the exact details of the experience. So what you may get eventually may not be a true recording of what exactly happened. Another disadvantage is the recollection being only one person's point of view. But at the same time, I need to acknowledge that oral history provides a fuller, more accurate picture of the past by augmenting the information provided by public records, so that it should just document the public records in terms of statistical data, in terms of photographs, in terms of the maps that you may have out there, in terms of the letters, the diaries, and other historical materials, some of which, of course, have been used a lot in making of a nation. The advantage of oral information is that it can provide information where there are no written sources. It is suitable for even the illiterate in society. I am also busy trying to record stories from my own community because nobody has done it. And what I noticed that I have to rely on the very, very, very old, over 70 years old, who cannot write. But that's the only source I have to get that information. Is very critical. Disadvantage of orality in terms of as a source of information for history is that, for instance, there are cases sometimes when you are dealing with what you may consider to be sensitive, and a narrator may want to conceal or to hide very important information. So that is quite a risk. I also want to add something about IP and orality. Of course, they go hand in hand, very critical. It's very important that oral historians or whoever is giving information orally make themselves familiar with the legal issues that relate to the practice of oral history, such as legal release agreements and challenges to interview restrictions, defamation, copyright, institutional review boards, etc. The memories that an interviewer records begin as the intellectual property of the interviewee. And many times the interviewee is not even aware that he's giving a lot of information which eventually will end up as somebody, owned by somebody. People own the copyright of their words. The importance of various legal documents pertaining to oral history should be availed to these people, even as much as they may not be illiterate. So that is very, very critical, that as in recording the history, whether as creative artists, we remain honest to the information that we get from this particular, from our interviewees. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for this very useful conversation around orality and the connection between that and intellect. Very much appreciated. I wanted to bounce this back also onto Saitabao. That connects with the work that you're.
Sorry, could you repeat that again? I lost you a bit.
Yeah, I wanted you to comment around the orality as well, but also in this context of the new media use, and what is the connection really? Because what is the connection? Because it's like going back in time and then going back into the future. New medium. Yet we are relying so much on oral history, history that is spoken. And you hear working on things, animation, augmented reality, and so what is really the connection amidst the challenges that, these things keep changing?
Yeah, I think based on the experience that we had during when we were filming our documentary, for example, we were finding about what these objects were. Because you find that even these big institutions, European institutions, there were ethnographers, anthropologists, they didn't know what these objects were at all, and they were hundreds of years old. But through our expedition, we were able to travel up country where we had conversations with a lot of people, even very older people who are between 90 to 100, and they are the only people who had that information about these objects, what these objects were used for, and the ideas behind these objects. So it's right, because at the end of the day, because it was this information was passed down orally, and we were very lucky enough to find these old men before their time has come to at least, pass that information down to us, even as filmmakers. So, and it was our duty and responsibility to sort of preserve what they shared. So, and we were able to preserve that knowledge system through film and through new media. So in terms of how we can be able to merge, because at the end of the day, you find the custodians of this information, they have this knowledge which is just within them, but we ask ourselves, how can we preserve this knowledge? And this is where we use now media, new media, and this is why we use filming, because at the end of the day, this is very important, crucial information that will always get lost. And for us now, we are preserving for the next generations, because for them, they were not able to preserve. Now, when it comes to intellectual property, I wanted to mention, of course, the digital space in itself has loopholes, have gray areas, right? Because, for example, Google Arts digitized the entire of the National Museum of Kenya. So who owns the intellectual property of, is it the museum? Yeah, is it the communities? Is it Google itself? So when it comes to intellectual property, it means we have to bring a lot of stakeholders to the table. This is including even lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, because at the end of the day, we'll find ourselves in an instance where, for example, there was this whole speculation about the Kenyan national anthem being copyrighted by an organization that is not Kenyan, right? We'll have the Kiondo, right, being copyrighted by a fashion label in Paris. So it's all about having a very dynamic and robust conversation with different stakeholders. This means also bringing very brilliant minds, especially in terms of intellectual property.
Well, thank you so much, and I think Saitabao, you have a lot of work in bridging the gap, in bridging the gap, and especially working in the digital space that is very fast advancing, and creating new forms of art that we are not even sure who owns whatever intellectual property that comes with it. And I think maybe Professor Bettina, you have something to say about the museum story?
Yeah, I'm interested. I think it's a good example of question of ownership. And the question of ownership in general is the main thing that people look at in intellectual property. And again, I don't think it's actually the one that is most useful to us, because the question of access and how the story is told is even more important. And I think the museum example is a problem also of how the story is told. I'm sure there's, they have a contract with Google, and I hope that contract included intellectual property information. The same will be for the new, I know that the Kenya Defense Forces were digitizing some of the railway material. Does it now belong to Kenya Defense Forces? I mean, it's an interesting question of where intellectual property rests, or what is the kinds of agreements made, and especially by governments. Things like the copyright for Kiondos, that is something that our government should have been able to challenge, right? Because it is a question of whether you can copyright things that are in general use and that has already has established elsewhere, like patents. They're systems that in theory work if we are ready and able and willing to challenge them, right? But I think the question about digitizing at all the material in the museums, or even like the work that Saitabao is doing in general, is a kind of a different question regarding collections of any sort. in any museums, even in our own museums, even in a community museum. And the question of who you ask, Saitabao, you mentioned asking men. I'm very interested about like when gender, class differences marginalize people within communities, when they get to have a say about the way certain stories are told. The youth versus the elderly. We always talk to old people, but what about the youth and their participation in how that story is told? So again, I'm just emphasizing that question about how the story gets told from it. I do think that we have to be super vigilant about calling the government to task about agreements with huge international corporations like Google or who offer to do helpful projects that obviously have a benefit to them that might not be ours when it comes to intellectual property. And Netflix included on that.
Wow, thank you so much. This conversation only gets a little bit more exciting with with every step and time. And I want us to move on to thinking about the last part of our conversation today, which is around financing. And all of us know that financing is connected, with who owns the intellectual property at the end of the day. It is connected to how the product is monetized. And it is also connected into what actually archives you can access to get this work. Sometimes I've seen us doing research and you have to fly into museums abroad to go and get, some works, to go and access some history work. When we were working on the book Shades of Benga, I recognize a few times where that material, so somebody has to sponsor and facilitate for that to happen. So there's always a question around film and financing. Where does it come from? Who owns? And all that kind of stuff. And to frame this conversation better, I want to invite Gitonga once again onto the floor to help us really think through what are the current opportunities, what are the current challenges, what is the current outlook of this ecosystem with regard to financing, and how does that also affect monetization?
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. I mean, of course, one of the hardest part of filmmaking is the finance part of it. And of course, in life, that is the hardest part also. So it's it's one of the biggest challenges. When I'm working on different projects, one of the ways I want to finance, or the ways I finance my projects, is to partner with different people. Sorry, I'm on set, so okay. So one of the ways is to try to partner with different people, especially when I'm talking about these local filmmakers. Just give me a minute. I have to move a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, great. I will sort of move this question on to Saitabao on the question on financing. What challenges are you experiencing? What opportunities are you exploiting being on the field? But also, Professor Bettina, feel free to also share with us, how are you financing part of the works that you're currently working on? Saitabao?
Just to pick up on what Gitonga was saying, financing is always troublesome, especially when it comes to into the arts. So, for instance, I would say we've seen a lot of activity, especially from the Kenya Film Commission, who've been really doing a lot of great job in terms of financing filmmakers, even from the very early stage, such as research and development of their projects. So there's that input from the government, which is now visible, which was kind of missing for a very long time, but now we can see they're really doing something great. And when it comes to financing, well, we get to sort of involve different stakeholders between different aspects of the projects. Because when you look, for example, in film, you have 5 branches, right? You have the research and development, pre-production, production, post-production, and distribution. So you try and get stakeholders from different departments and partners where they can work and facilitate financing in each stage of the entire overall film. So the one thing that we're also trying to, in terms of structure, such a way in terms of documenting film, documenting African history through film, and is trying to convince the people in the private sector because they're very skeptical, because sometimes they see the return on investment is a bit further, it's not making sense, and also it's a very risky business to get into. So at the end of the day, we also have to look at financing from the distribution perspective, which is where we are lagging behind, because at the end of the day, if we properly document our African history, and which we are doing, we don't have to limit the market being just in Kenya, because right now we're in a global era. So it means we can even find a lot of markets, not just in Kenya, but in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Europe, North America, South America. The market is huge. And you can see it's a testament where the #1 show on Netflix was a Korean film, a Korean series. It says people want to consume. So when it comes to financing, it means we also have to focus financing into distribution and marketing as well, our stories to the outside world as well.
Brilliance, brilliance, brilliance. Gitonga, are you back? Are you able to speak now? Okay. As you get ready, Professor Bettina, what comments do you have with regards to financing? How are you getting around this complex issue, especially when you want to document, African history? And also, there is a question that has come through for you, so maybe you can tackle it as you speak about that.
Okay, so yeah, in terms of financing, struggling basically, and finding it incredibly difficult. It's interesting, I would say, because we are not interested in making a documentary, but a feature film set in a particular historical moment, right? So financing, sometimes for documentaries, there's more money. It's small amounts of money, but there's more of it, I would say, than feature films that are a certain way of telling stories of Africa, let's say. I think there's a preference to what people call edgy underbelly stories, which is not really what we want to tell. And so I think this is also like financing coming from where the example of the Korea would be super interesting. Korea decided at a moment that it was going to be a feature in music and in film, and the government really funded heavily those two things to make it have an international stage. So I'm looking forward to our government doing the same and helping us in a similar way, but even helping us just in the marketing maybe would be very, very useful. I think the question that you had mentioned is about whether the Copyright Board, the Kenya Copyright Board, is sufficient to protect IP users. And I think this is where, when coming to do with something like Netflix, so there's a bunch of different ways. So intellectual property of a certain kind is protected under the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, and under our Copyright Board, not copyright, intellectual property in general, and the Copyright Board is specifically to do with copyright. And it's true that's much harder to protect because your one version that you have is, if you write a film script, for instance, it's that script that is protected, not the general idea about the script. So I think in terms of how some of this more community-based material and its movement has to be protected at the level of traditional knowledges and intellectual property that is actually outside of copyright as such. So it's not about authorship. It's about community ownership. And the National Museums, it works through, the Ministry of Heritage. I can't think of what the exact name of the ministry is, but the overall Ministry of Heritage and Culture would be in charge of general intellectual property. It also falls under the rules of the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. And that is true. Any agreements with film companies like Netflix, though, really you need some good intellectual property lawyers every time you as a producer make a film. And or the distributors need them for the distribution, and how those things get compensated, or in the form of distribution, in the form of additional rights for television, for merchandising, for repeated productions, etc.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Gitonga, now I see that you're back, so let's go back to your question on your comment on financing and monetization. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What I was saying is, on the projects that I do, and especially when we are making, one of the plans I do is I partner with different people. That is one way of getting finance, or just putting finance together so that you are able to make something or produce something. Another way is also Kenya Film Commission has been one of the ways that is supporting local filmmakers, especially here in Kenya, by providing the grants, which has really done good when we are making these films, because I've been involved in different productions and different projects which is financed by Kenya Film Commission. So every year I think they've been doing this for some time, and it has been able to at least make filmmakers, local filmmakers, to make some films and tell their stories. And also I've been able to partner with different government departments, including Department of Film Services. Finance is not only about the money part of it, but also, when you have to hire equipment, or you have to get to different locations and stuff like that. So some of these government departments, if filmmakers, local filmmakers, go to them and talk to them, they're able to, waiver some of the charges or stuff like that. So it really helps when you can talk to these departments, government departments. And the latest project, which we are still, on the pre-production phase, we are actually in partnership with Makueni County government. It was important to the Makueni government, county government, to be part and puzzle of this project. This is the Oath of the Ancients, and also stroke Oath of Justice, because it is actually a story that interested, the people. The local people were able to relate to it. They knew, and the county government was able to. We partnered with them, and we are still doing the pre-production, because somehow we want to. We have made the documentary part of it. Now we are writing the series part of it, and also we are hoping to make a movie out of it. So when you think about financing, don't think about only the money part of it. Think how you can partner with different people to at least reduce on your budget. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Wonderful tips right there. And thank you so much. And I hope that you can also get to make a little book out of that whole series that you're currently working on. Now we're coming to the close, and I want to begin with a question that has just come from the panels. And this one is directed to Professor Bettina. It says, please get us the bodies that Professor Bettina mentioned in regard to IP protection. I think you mentioned WIPO and others. Just type them out so we can share them with the people on the panel. I'm going to do a closing round, so I'm going to give each panelist a moment to speak. But I also would like all of us to sort of share one title or one book that is connected to African histories that everyone must watch and why they must watch or read this. And I'm going to start with Professor Mugubi.
Okay. Yeah, what I can just emphasize is that it's very important, of course, to talk about our history because it shows where we're coming from, and art can be used in that regard, where we are, and implicitly points out where we might or remain constant, or depending on whether we are ready to chart a new destiny for ourselves, respectively. And at this point, it should be borne in mind and underscored again that in remaining faithful to reality and in helping societies forge a new destiny, artists have found themselves in problems with, of course, political authorities, or have had their work seriously censored, if not rejected altogether by, cowardly establishment. However, we should play a role as artists because works of art are a historical necessity and they must always grapple with reality. The book that I would want to recommend is Black African Cinema, a book by entitled Black African Cinema by Ukadike Frank. It touches on how you can use a work of art to, record history creatively. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wrapping statement and also the title that you've shared with us. Francis, we're coming to the close, so the floor is yours. What are your closing remarks, and what is a film or a book title that you could recommend for our viewers?
Yes, for the book, perhaps I could maybe facing Mount Kenya. I'm so much on making documentaries and all that, other than reading the literary literature. And there, I just wanted to make quickly this the finance. You never give me opportunity to respond on this issue of finance. Yeah, and I just want to say this, that resources are never enough. Even us in government, we find ourselves looking for co-productions. Co-productions is just like when Gitonga has also mentioned, it's just looking for other entities, perhaps with a proposal. Maybe we can do something for them, and then we just cost share. And that's how we've been also been able to survive. However, we have also to be very, very strategic. As I've said, the resources are never enough. Yeah, because we all want good productions, good quality productions. We also want productions that will not run into millions of shillings, therefore cheap or affordable. We also want a production that is not going to take ages or decades. In other words, we want a fast, and there's something that we can complete, that can be completed. Now, these three aspects are kind of diagram. One has to be very strategic, because if we are not going to be strategic, we will never finish this work. And it will take ages, or we are just leave it at the middle. That is the good quality. It's cheap, not cheap in the sense of workmanship, but cheap as in cost. Such as something affordable and not. Now, once you have the three aspects, that is good, cheap, and fast. Now that is now where the rubber meets the road, and that is once you unlock that one, you are good to go, and your productions will be just there. Now the dynamics of these three aspects is that any two of them will work. Once you can't have all of them in one basket at one time, so you have the moment you choose to have two, you sacrifice the other. Like if you want a good quality production, and at the same time is cheap, then it can't be fast. Now, I just also want to remind our viewers that rich people do what? To save time. They use money to save time, while poor people do it the other way around. They use time to save money. And therefore, for one, now to do the balancing act, one has to apply here. If we want a good production, and at the same time, we want it to be affordable, that is cheap, then it can't be fast. Yeah. At the same time, if you want it good quality production and it's just fast, it can't be cheap. That's how it goes. And we have to learn how to balance those acts, and then we will be good to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks, and also for taking us back onto the question of film financing. And I'm gonna pass on the floor right now to Saitabao.
Yeah, so I think at this very particular moment, it's very crucial also as about us as Africans sort of defining our identity, because for so long it's always been credited or being told from other people's perspective. So, and it's very important for us to document, because also it gives an identity of who we are and where we want to go, and what we can use. We can use the available tools at our disposal to sort of give a nuance in terms of documenting our history, not just the past, even the present that we are in at the very moment is the future's history. So even this in itself is part of, documenting history and how we navigate. So in terms of, I'm a very visual person. I would recommend a film which was really interesting, done by a Ghanaian filmmaker called The Burial of Kojo. The reason why I really like this film is because the filmmaker used it's a fiction film, but it has a lot of history and a lot of romanticism of being African and what an African is, and through just normal human storytelling. That's it for me. And it's been lovely being in this panel. Very great panelist, I'd say. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to actually meeting you in person to engage further on some of these issues. Gitonga, what are your closing remarks, and what's one thing that we must watch or read?
Okay, first I want to, maybe ask African filmmakers, content producers, that it's time to export our stories, based on what we had long time ago, what stories were passed down generations from different generation to different generations. So it's high time we base our story, we create our story, we recreate our stories by basing them on what we knew or what was told to us. It is very important because we don't have to limit ourselves in our current situations, but we can always talk about our history in a way that is very interesting and good to watch or listen to, and it will tell a lot about us. One of the things that I'll recommend a TV series, a local TV series that is in Kenya, and it's based on a very simple thing called Pete. Pete is created by Daudi Anguka. And, this is interesting to watch because, some of these, artifacts or simple items had a lot of significance in a community. So for me, I'll recommend Pete. It's on Maisha Magic, local production, great costuming and everything. It tells a lot about our culture and our traditions. Thank you.
Wonderful, and I hope that our host, the Lake International Pan-African Film Festival, is taking note of these titles so that they can share it as a playlist from our conversation today, because this is how we also create content for the people out there. Coming to you, Professor Bettina, what are your closing remarks? What must we watch or read this week?
Thank you so much. And such a pleasure to be on this panel with such exciting people and such wonderful information. I would just say that I think the time is now, and we are set to really do fantastic new, both in terms of types of films and media, and tell our story in all the multiplicity. I'm most interested in the mundane, the everyday, the sort of thing you run into on a street when walking somewhere. So I hope all from the epic to the mundane stories are being told out there. I struggle over what book or film to recommend, since there are too many. I'll just say one book that influenced my life. Interestingly enough, it's from a Haitian author. It's called Silencing the Past by Michel Rolfe-Trouillot. And it's about the way history is produced, made, silenced, and otherwise exists in our world, and all the power dynamics behind that.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So thank you, my esteemed panelists. It was a pleasure hosting all of you, and I hope I was a good moderator for this session. In this session, we covered the importance of telling our own stories. We also covered the subject of accessibility in how we store and archive and make available these materials for people to write and shoot African histories. We also talked about technology, new, old, and backward and front compatibility for that to happen. We covered monetization. We talked about intellectual property. We also talked about orality and over-reliance on that and the challenges that come with that. We talked about financing, and we also recommended some of interesting titles that we think could help shape our narrative on African history. It's been a pleasure to be invited once again by the team, and for the people that have joined us in the gallery. Thanks, Alice Wangui, for being such a great member of the gallery and conversing together with us, Vigilance as well, and others. We appreciate all of you. The time now is 16:04, and we bring an end to this session. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Mine is just to say thank you so much, Gregg, for being such a good moderator. We've really enjoyed this particular session. Thank you so much as well to the panelists for sacrificing your time and just sharing your knowledge with us. We've really enjoyed this particular session. And to everyone who is following this discussion, thank you so much as well for sacrificing your time. Just to remind you of a few things, tomorrow we have the closing event, that is the Lake International Pan-African Film Festival Gala Awards, going down at Prestige Cinema. We look forward to having those who got the invitation. And in case you did not find the invitation because of the COVID situation in the country, we'll be streaming live, so you'll not be left out. And just also to thank our sponsors, Kenya Film Commission, Amnesty International, Talanta Institute, French Embassy, for being very supportive to ensure that LIP 2021 is something that has actually happened. Asante sana to the organizers of Lake International Pan-Africa, led by our director, Dr. Zipporah Okoth. Asante sana, our festival coordinator, Madam Suki Wanza, then myself, Vigilance Atieno, the festival manager. Then we have Abu Melita, Benson Gobia, and Nick Adongo. Thank you so much, team. We look forward to having a beautiful, beautiful gala award ceremony tomorrow from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Prestige Cinema, Prestige Plaza, Ngong Road. I'll just play our promo and then we call it a session. Asanteni sana, God bless you, stay safe, and just take care of yourself. Bye-bye, guys.
At a time where everything has gone virtual, Lake International Pan-African Film Festival 6th edition takes you there. From 3rd to the 6th of November, we take you there to experience humanity through workshops, panel discussions, open forums, screenings and a gala award. Come and experience this year's festival online. Lake International Pan-African Film Festival 6th edition. Disrupt the narrative.
So thank you so much. Let's meet tomorrow at Prestige Cinema, Prestige Plaza, Ngong Road for Lake International Pan-African Film Festival Gala Awards. And thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Enjoy your evening. Asanteni.